It is TAW Unwrapped. Excited about the last 16 of the Champions League, what's got us here, what's to come next, and how that draw breaks down. I've got Gunn, I've got Keifer, MacDonald, and I've got Beth Lindop to work through that. But before then, we're with Aura Frames. You can see the frames in question right in front of me. Be scrolling through over the course of the show. Might take it off the table at some point. Don't want me to be too distracted by Josh Sexton's good looks as and when it pops onto the screen. But ultimately, why Aura Frames partnering with the Anfield Wrap? Well, to be really, really honest, what they want is for you to look at this and think that is the perfect Mother's Day gift. I want to be clear about Mother's Day gifts. I'm sure that all of us will say that we very much do love our mothers, but often you can't be bothered doing too much thinking. So the Anfield Wrap's done it for you with Aura Frames here for you coming all the way through. So you get this lovely digital photo frame. It's unlimited number of photos. You can add any time, anywhere through the app. There's a lovely gift box that comes with it as well. And if you go to auraframes.co.uk, you can get £35 off their best-selling Carver matte frames. It's named the top frame of this type by The Independent if you use TAW at checkout. So that is absolutely fantastic. So it's £35 off Carver matte. Use the promo code TAW as and when you come to secure this, and just know you've got Mother's Day boxed off because getting it boxed off is the best thing you can do, not least because Liverpool play Tottenham. Bear that in mind. Liverpool are playing Tottenham, so you need to get your business out the way early, get this sorted out. There's 2 games this week. There's just loads going on, so we've sorted that for you there, Aura Frames, all that sort of stuff, because one of the things that's going on is Liverpool go to Galatasaray. Liverpool also are part of a Champions League draw, an exciting Champions League draw, Beth. Let's just sort of do it in broad strokes first and foremost. There was a feeling, obviously, that Arsenal's path to the semi-finals, at least, was relatively straightforward. There's a feeling that whoever else, Manchester City or Real Madrid, will end up doing it the hard way. But if you look at the, when Real Madrid won it in 2022 when they played Liverpool in the final, you'd argue they did it the hard way. Yeah. It's the Champions League and it's meant to be difficult. I'm not saying that if I was Arsenal, I'd be gutted. But there would be a bit of me thinking it's nice to have glamour ties. They almost certainly won't have them. Liverpool, Galatasaray, and then Paris Saint-Germain or Chelsea will not be straightforward, and Galatasaray will feel like a big day, but on the whole, it's just the last 16 of the Champions League, and that's a good thing.
It is, yeah, and you know, if you want to win the competition, you obviously have to beat some of the very best teams. Liverpool did it in 2018-19. They obviously beat Bayern Munich, don't they, in the last 16, and then, you know, infamously beat Barcelona in the semis. So there are always going to be tough draws.
Get out of a group with Paris Saint-Germain and Napoli.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think, you know, the thing with Liverpool, and I know we spoke a little bit about it I think it was on the Friday night before the draw, and I think we said we'd rather have had Atletico purely just because of the side of the draw that it put you on, and I still stand by that. I think while, you know, Galatasaray is probably on paper the easier opponent, I think it would have maybe been more beneficial for Liverpool to be on that other side. But I always think Liverpool, sort of no matter what condition they're in, and I think we can all agree they're probably not in the best condition this season, that they've always got a chance in European competition. Arsenal, I think, you know, when you consider that they're going to be battling until the end with the Premier League title race, it's no bad thing for them that they've got the draw that they've got. But yeah, you have to beat the best teams if you want to win this competition at some point. So yeah, it sort of is what it is for Liverpool, I guess.
Keifer, I think that's the sort of the got to be the start point, is that you should expect it to be hard at this stage. You've played some decent sides up to this point. To get here, there's been a couple of shocks, not least in the knockout round, which, you know, I think Bodo Glimt to the number one, disposing of Inter Milan across the course of 2 legs. But all of that said, you know, you do think that you are going to get the best sides, and even going back to what Beth points out there is the year Liverpool win it. Last 16 is Bayern Munich, but last 8 Porto. You know, the draw hasn't always behaved historically anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to echo Beth's point, you know, it is a scary side of the draw, but I think the Anfield factor is massive. And if you were to offer any Liverpool fan the opportunity to play Real Madrid, you know, in a one-off game, or to play them over 2 legs at Anfield, you know, the same goes for Manchester City as well. You know, which would they prefer? I think, you know, wholeheartedly everyone would probably rather the 2 legs. You know, it might, you know, the way Liverpool are at the moment, kind of the way that they're playing, and maybe not the swashbuckling football they were in 2018-19. I think the Anfield factor is going to be huge, because I think over the course of 90 minutes, you don't really know what you're going to get from a Liverpool team at the moment. It's a bit of a lottery. So I think having those big sides and look, if Liverpool are going to get to the latter stages, they are going to get to the semi-finals, they are going to get to the final, they will have done so knocking out some of the big boys. Okay, they might end up playing in Arsenal in the final if they were to get there, but they will have had to have some big scalps to get there, you'd imagine. So I think it bodes well, and I think with this stage of the Champions League, it feels like it really starts to get going. It feels like it almost starts, especially now with this kind of prolonged league phase. This is like the real business, the serious stuff, and I think it's a time of year where, regardless of what's happening in the league, you look at the year Liverpool won in 2005. Things weren't going great. The Champions League was almost a bit of an outlet. Could that be the same for them this season? You'd hope so. And as I say, it is a really tough draw. Some really big games on there, but with Anfield behind them, I think they've got every chance really.
It does feel in 2005, it's not quite as extreme as that. Let's be clear that 2005 side, whilst had some excellent players, had some sort of pretty clear flaws. Ali, I think there's a little bit of a parallel for me with 2007, where a league season that theoretically could have promised a fair bit peters out a little bit from Liverpool's point of view, but they end up making a Champions League final, playing AC Milan. They have a tough journey to get there. It's really tight games, which is what you think we're going to get here as well. It might well be that the away game against Galatasaray is the most unhinged, but then I think the games will become increasingly tight, increasingly nip and tuck from Liverpool's point of view, and that is just it's a normal Champions League journey that I think Liverpool are on.
It is, and Liverpool now, as we've mentioned all season, aren't in the greatest of health in terms of their consistency and fitness, etc., etc. And now sometimes you have to take stock in a season, and I know we're going to come on to Tottenham, and sometimes you've got to prioritise what you want to get out of a season. Liverpool know they're not going to win a league again this year, and that's fine. But now where do you take stock and go and aim for? Because it's really now the FA Cup and it's the Champions League, and like Beth says, there's no real easy game in the Champions League, but now with Liverpool, I can still guarantee in our current sort of form and fitness and how we're playing, no team wants to come to Anfield. We can be a team akin to 2005, but teams still didn't want to come to Anfield.
Yeah.
And that's something I think we've got to hang our hat on slightly as well, and take a bit of confidence that we're still seen as a viable threat in this competition. And hopefully the players take confidence in that as well, because we have seen glimpses this season within cup competitions and in the Premier League that Liverpool can string something together. God, it does our head in, because they're not stringing it together often enough. But there are fleeting moments, and there's players of Florian Wirtz and Hugo Ekitike's standards who are propelling something. And I think we can take that into the Champions League. And we're fully well aware that every team in the Champions League that is there now, you can have an easy side of the draw like a Bodo Glimt, and you can have a Galatasaray, but every team deserves to be there. So I don't think we should be threatened by our side of the draw as such. I think we should really sort of take confidence in, well, let's make something of this. And if we've got to beat the team in front of us, if it's a Galatasaray, and then the next round is PSG, well, let's go for it. Because quite frankly, in the league now, there's not the prize that we were going to go and win. And as we're scrapping it out in the league for a fourth place, well, let's put ourselves and take some confidence in trying to do something in the Champions League.
I want to talk about the draw in terms of, there's obviously a bit of chat on Arsenal's side and all that sort of stuff, Beth. For me, it's marked out by what actually happens to Sporting get themselves into the top 8. And they do it in a really, really clever way. I think Sporting's results are worthy of a fair bit of respect. They win the 4 home games, which involves them having to beat Paris Saint-Germain, the pot 1 team. And they beat the pot 4 team away. That's Athletic Bilbao. They get that win. And then from there, they just get one of the draw. They had away games against Bayern Munich, Juventus, Napoli, drew at Juventus. And then that gets them in. That gets 16 points. And to me, I think you're going to see a bit of sides either knowing what the task is next couple of seasons and going, right, how do we do that? And going that way, or realising, hang on, we could grasp the nettle of this here and pull this off. And I think we'll have to get used to it. I think there'll often be one side who feels in the top 8 a little bit like, well, how do they pull that off? And part of how they pull that off in Sporting's case this season, the underlying numbers aren't great, but they've had opportunities and matches, they've managed games really well, and then nicked one against Paris Saint-Germain, and that's how they've done it. And I think there's likely to be a side like this year in, year out who just has it open up.
Yeah, I mean, we're learning more and more, aren't we, about this format. It's obviously still in its very early phases. I think last season it was a real sort of unknown quantity about how many points would be required, and even like the managers were getting asked questions and they were like, we don't really know. And still now it is a little bit like that, and I understand the frustration when that draw was made, because you look, obviously Liverpool's prize for finishing top last season was PSG. just as they were coming into form. And obviously Arsenal's prize this season feels a lot more. It feels like that they've earned it more on merit than it felt like Liverpool did last season. So, yeah, I understand the frustration there, but I think, like you say, there are still so many variables with this format. It's so dependent on the draw. I mean, Liverpool again, sort of they go into it as champions this season, and I'd argue they probably got a harder Champions League draw than Tottenham.
Yep.
For example, Arsenal to the credit, you can speak about they've got an easy path to the final, but they've had some tough games in that
Yeah,
league
yeah.
phase.
Well, they've been Bayern Munich and Inter Milan home and away.
Yep. Did they beat Atletico as well?
I think so. Yeah.
So if they'd have got either of those three teams in the last 16, I said, oh, that's a tricky draw for Arsenal. But they've beaten all of those teams anyway. So I think the thing with this tournament is it does hinge on moments. I very much doubt that Bodo, Glimt or Sporting would do anything against Arsenal, but you never know. So yeah, I think there is always going to be, you're so reliant on how other teams do, aren't you, really, in a sense, in the way that last season, if PSG had just been a little bit better earlier on in the season, then Liverpool wouldn't have ended up playing them, and they probably would have got further in the competition. So yeah, there are a lot of different variables, and it's still sort of a little bit, it's hard to really predict how things are going to unfold.
On the whole, the underlying numbers of the performances Ali did hit where you would think the groups are. I say Sporting a little bit of an outlier. Newcastle become a little bit of an outlier once you get past their game against Karabag, because they get Karabag home and away, so that kicks them on. But on the whole, when you looked at the underlying numbers of goal difference, including penalties, expected goal difference, including penalties, the top 8, Arsenal, Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Manchester City, they're all the ones that are sort of amongst the top in there as well. The automatic qualification teams pushing all the way through. Chelsea being another one of them. It's worth pointing out. They are the ones who have performed the best.
Yeah, and they have. And there's an element where I believe, obviously, all those teams in terms of their performances are learning to understand the format a little bit better, and that's where you will get outliers like Sporting, where I think they just understood the format perfectly, where they have worked out that their way home is don't lose at home. And do you know what? If we can pick up a 1-1 against Juventus, brilliant. It's another point on the board. But really, the numbers have really painted the picture, with Sporting included as well. And I think that's where the format, like you said, is ever changing, because we're still learning and they're learning on the job as well. And it's probably why the draw and the different sides of the draw have ended up how they've ended up. I quite like it, in comparison to a few years ago, where it's a little bit more, I'd say, on merit for certain teams, where they've done the business they need to do, and now they're exactly where they should be. Now, like you said, with teams like Sporting, they do stand out, and they are an outlier, but I still think that shouldn't be held against them. In that sense, I don't think we should look down on them for being an outlier, and that they've earned their place there. And being on Arsenal's side of the draw, I think if you're an Arsenal fan, you're looking at that side of the draw pretty happy. But I still wouldn't rest on your laurels, because I wouldn't want to go up to the Arctic Circle and play away. Do you know? And that really is the end of the day. At the end of the day, this is the point where everything is so up and down in the Champions League, with last season and now into this season, that Inter Milan were knocked out. Inter Milan were in a final last year. It's not as simple as it was, or it's not as mapped out as it used to be. So I think the underlying numbers have told really the story we all thought, but actually the underlying numbers now have given an opportunity to a few other clubs to go, well, if you can hang your hat on something, you've got a place in it with the big boys.
I mean, I was just going to say, on Bodo Glimt, I think it's just unbelievable, isn't it? They hadn't won a Champions League game before they beat City, and they've now won 4 on the bounce. And even before this season, kind of what they've done in the Conference League and the Europa League. I mean, they thrashed Roma a few years ago, didn't they? Obviously, they got to the semi-finals of the Europa League last year as well, were knocked out by Spurs. So it's not like, I know people will look at them and be like, that's a favourable side of the draw, but as Ali says, they've earned it on merit, really. They've not just turned up and won a raffle. They've beaten Inter Milan, they've beaten Man City and beaten Atletico Madrid. So they're some of the toughest games, the toughest fixtures you can get in Europe.
All right, let's go through them one at a time. We'll start at the bottom, actually. We'll work up towards Liverpool, and we'll do Liverpool last. Beth, Leverkusen, Arsenal. I think there's obviously Arsenal will go into this as favourites. They've got the second leg at home, better side, the way they've been this year in Europe, and even leading into this game by virtue of playing Saturday in the FA Cup and their game playing on Wednesday.
Yeah.
You know, it's not even as though sometimes the Premier League can be a bit punishing, but in this instance, it's the FA Cup and Arsenal are being looked after a little bit more, I think it's fair to say. But Leverkusen to have European experience. This is a side that's made a Europa League final in the recent past. I think that they'll fancy that they can make life difficult for Arsenal. The issue is just how difficult you can make life for Arsenal at the moment, because there are sides who are exceptionally resilient. That's what's brought them to the party.
Yeah, that they are, and they've been capable, certainly in the Champions League, I think, of making games, sort of making periods of games a little bit of a non-event and just sort of taking the sting out of the opposition, and then they've had 15-minute spells where they've taken the game away from them. They've been very good at doing that this season.
It's interesting being better at that. I think across the 2 years in the Champions League than they have. I mean, I know they get knocked out last season in the semi-finals by PSG, but it's felt to me as though they play slightly less burdened football at times in the Champions League, which is odd to think.
Yeah, and I think, again, maybe that comes down to, well, first of all, the fact that, you know, what we've said about Liverpool, why have Tottenham done so much better in the Champions League? Because, you know, it's a different style, it's different, it's less physicality, it maybe is sort of less pressure. It's, certainly in the early stages, it's less pressure than the Premier League in a sense, particularly with this new format, because you think, well, you know, if you lose a game, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, Liverpool have a really humiliating defeat to PSV, but they still end up in the top 8. So you're allowed those slip ups, and I think for Arsenal, sort of the Premier League is sort of the holy grail this season, isn't it? It's the one they want. It's the one they're desperate for. I know, obviously, you know, there'll be a number of fans who want to win that first Champions League, but I think for them this season, if they win the Premier League, they'll be happy. And I think maybe so that desperation that sometimes has happened in games at the Emirates where they've needed to get a winner, or they've been behind, and that sort of the nervousness has transcended to the pitch. I don't think that's quite been there, and maybe that helps as well. So yeah, I think for Leverkusen, obviously that first leg is going to be crucial. If they can get to a point where they're able to take the lead in the tie, then, you know, they go back to the Emirates and they do have European experience. And again, going back to that nervousness, if Arsenal are, you know, a goal down and in a game that they're expected, in a tie that they're expected to win, you know, you could maybe then sort of play on that frustration. But yeah, they've just got to stay in it, haven't they, Leverkusen? Because Arsenal, you know, if Arsenal win away at Leverkusen, I just don't think there's any chance they come back and win at the Emirates.
It's that period that Beth describes of Arsenal, which they've done well in Europe, of them putting the hammer down. You know, I think last season, you can say that they do it really, really well when Rice scores those free kicks very, very quickly. That feeling suddenly, oh my God, this, you know, from Real Madrid's point of view, this has just now gone in a completely different direction. And even then the second half of the second leg, there's the ability there for Arsenal then to remove all further doubt. And that's what Leverkusen are going to have to be prepared for, I think, more than anything, Keifer, up to and including if they do concede at home the first goal, the next 15 minutes is almost the most important thing in the two legs. They've got to ensure that nothing gets out of hand.
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose the flip side of that is every game feels like a final for Arsenal at the moment. You know, in almost every competition, there's talk of the quadruple. And obviously go through in the FA Cup yesterday as well, and kind of we know as kind of, you know, people in and around Liverpool what that pressure brings. Obviously, having done so the other year, you know, not least to mention they've got the cup final coming up against Manchester City. So I'm not saying Arsenal will take their eye off the ball, but if I'm Leverkusen, I'm thinking, you know, even if they say Arsenal 1-1 at Leverkusen and go back to the Emirates, like, could Arsenal, will they be looking to rotate? Will they maybe slightly take their eye off the ball? I think there is opportunities there, and obviously Leverkusen, they do have goals in that side.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not a case of they've got absolutely nothing to offer, you know, if a chance does fall. But I mean, it will be really difficult because I think Arsenal, I don't think they're the best team in the country. I think they're the most efficient, and obviously they know how to. They're getting to that stage now where they've been in a few title races. They've had those learning moments. They're learning how to grind out results, and kind of, you know, each season they're getting deeper and deeper into these competitions. They're in the title race longer and longer. But, you know, if I was, you know, someone associated with Leverkusen, I'd maybe be hanging on my hat on. It's a busy month for them. It's a busy couple of weeks, and even if, you know, that boat does seem to rock, you know, in one fixture or another, or even a 15-minute period here or there, I think it will be a big test of Arsenal.
Leverkusen can choose to use their energy solely for these two legs. That is their saving grace. That is the one thing that they've got that Arsenal just do not have. They cannot put the feet up in the league next weekend. They're not in a position to do that at this point. For Leverkusen, they can just decide that this is the season and go from there. That comes with its own pressure, Ali, obviously, as well. But that is, if you are Leverkusen, that's probably your best way of approaching this.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, if you look at both sides of the team's mindsets here, Leverkusen are probably quite happy with the first leg being at home, because go for it, and because you've got nothing to lose at that point. If you go to the Emirates and get whacked, better teams have had that in them, and that's okay. So I think for Leverkusen there, they can just put all their might into this. If you're Arsenal now, you would be looking for it to be the most professional and efficient European away performance. If you go in there and get a 1-0, happy days, you're laughing. Even if you get a 0-0. Now, I do think Arsenal will probably stretch their legs a little bit there. I don't think it will be as simple as that for Leverkusen. I do think Arsenal will go there and do very, very well. But I think if you are Arsenal, there is absolutely no pressure for you to go and put on a performance or a showing to suggest any more than a stable result. Now, I think with Leverkusen as well, the interesting thing for them is they will have nothing to lose in that sense, obviously being a 2-leg game. But I also think for Leverkusen, in the back of their mind, is they won't want to get whacked, because they won't want that sense of embarrassment that they've got to the last 16, and other clubs will be looking around going, well, actually, I think we'd have given Arsenal a better game here. And you don't want the game getting away from Leverkusen. So I think they've got to play a little bit of risk and reward of put pressure on Arsenal and make them think, and just have it in the back of their mind of, do you go for pace and try and turn Arsenal, but you do that in sort of fleeting moments during the game and make them sort of question where Leverkusen are going to build from and their sort of way home. But I think Arsenal really, if we're honest, I think Arsenal will have a plan, and I think they will work to the plan and be very efficient to get the victory.
I think you can expect that. Sporting versus Bodo Glimt, Keifer's just an interesting tie in the end, where it ends up, between the two of them. Both of them will not have necessarily budgeted for or expected the idea of a Champions League quarter-final. Both of them have got the possibility of one. And then from there, we can allow the cliche of, well, anything can happen. There can be a mad red card in a game or anything like that, and you never know what that could bring. It does feel as though a lot of this is, again, very first leg dependent. It's a funny one, and I agree on Leverkusen, and I think you can say for Bodo Glimt. I think Bodo Glimt want the first leg at home. Mm-hmm. I think they're happy with the first leg at home, because that makes clear to them what they've got to go and defend from that point onwards. And I think that if you're Sporting, you just want to get out of there, ideally as warmly as possible.
It's the Monday on Mag derby, isn't it? That it's like the hipster kind of derby of this season. But yeah, I think the Inter Milan game is a perfect example of kind of using that home advantage early on. And as you say, then they go to the San Siro and they know what they have to do. They know they have to dig deep. They know they've got something to defend. If the roles are reversed and they'd gone to the San Siro first, there's kind of every chance that maybe Inter Milan, just purely based on quality, pick them apart. Maybe it's 2 or 3-0, and then all of a sudden, it's like Inter are going there, and it's like they have something to defend. So I think home, being at home first is almost it is an advantage, and especially when you're playing 200 miles into the Arctic Circle. I was talking to John Murray actually the other day, and he went there for the City game, and he just said he's never seen anything like it, and just in terms of it's no wonder City lost. You could be the best football team in the world, but the conditions, it's an artificial pitch as well. Yeah. It is just, there's so much more than just kind of the football, and there's so many other things that stats can't quantify. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Bodo Glimt, if they were able to kind of pull it off and get to the quarters. I think you always think when a team has a run like this, it's going to end, the bubble's going to burst. But even before they beat Manchester City, they had a couple of close games in the group. Did they lose to Juventus quite late on? Yeah. Did they? So they're no mugs really. And as I say, they've kind of had that European pedigree. They've beaten Porto, they've beaten Lazio in recent seasons. They've played Tottenham, so they'll know what they're doing. They're experienced kind of as much as you can be. I think. The only thing I've kind of thought each time they've played in the Champions League is obviously it's their off season at the moment, and I think it starts. I think it's after the second leg of the last 16, so maybe that's the one thing. Is it rhythm could maybe catch them out, that intensity, but they've shown so far that it hasn't. So it's a really interesting game. It would be really interesting to see how they manage that one.
It's the story that you sort of want, but let's be clear about this. Sporting have been due a bit of a European run. We often see Porto quite late in this competition, going down the years. Liverpool often have run into them as part of that journey. I think Portuguese football will feel as though it should have a representative in the last 16 in the Champions League. I think Portuguese football, I feel like it should have one in the last 8. Mm-hmm. It's a really strong nation in the international sphere. So Sporting themselves will be pretty geared up for it as well, and feel as though they've got a good opportunity.
Yeah, they will. I mean, Benfica obviously have had the headlines from a Portuguese perspective, haven't they, this season with what they managed to do against Real Madrid in the last
stage,
of the league phase. So yeah, I think they'll absolutely want to, sort of stick one to them a little bit and make themselves sort of the main Portuguese team in the Champions League this season. I also think it's probably a bit hard for them because I feel like Bodo are maybe the first team really since Ajax in 18-19. Obviously, Ajax completely different vibe to Bodo in terms of pedigree and history and whatever, but it felt like Ajax was like everyone else's like second team because that team, there was so much to like about them. It was different, it was exciting, and I think sometimes when you get a team like that, which I think Bodo are this season, sort of fairy tale story, aren't they? And all of the build up and like Keifer said, the artificial pitch and you just think, could you really be bothered with all of that, with everyone rooting sort of against you kind of thing, and so that's another factor for Sporting. But I think, like you say, that they'll want to do Portuguese football proud, and they've got they have players who can in moments deliver.
Yep. Okay. Tottenham go to Atletico Madrid. I mean, it's the whole nation smiles when you say it. They go to Atletico Madrid, and I feel as though if I was Atletico Madrid, I'd almost feel a bit like, well, this is weird. You know what I mean? Like, Atletico Madrid often get to feel like they're the spoiler. They're the odd ones. They're the ones that no one can quite make sense or head nor tail of. But this season, they've actually been a relatively normal football team, Atletico Madrid. They haven't been anywhere near as parsimonious. They haven't been anywhere near as nasty, I'd argue. Got a couple of question marks around big players. Alvarez has had criticism a lot in the local press. The local press in Madrid obviously being the biggest press in the world. The local press, do you know what I mean? It sounds as though there's 8 people reading it and it gets delivered by a fellow with a dog. They're in a bit of a funny moment at Atleti themselves. They need to make sure they're playing in this competition next season. The top of the La Liga is a little bit tighter than they'd like. They're not that often. They get quite nicely marooned in third, Ali. It's a game that Atletico Madrid are going to go into as favourites, I think, across the 2 legs, which is just all a bit weird for them.
Yeah, I think if you're Atletico Madrid, you think you've got problems. and then you look across and you think, Christ. I mean, I think Atleti, I don't know, I mean, I'm intrigued to know your opinions here. Would they have wanted Tottenham?
Over Liverpool, yeah. They'd rather have Tottenham than Liverpool.
Yeah.
But would they have wanted Tottenham as a fixture because Tottenham is such a basket case? Would you rather have someone with a bit more stability that you know what you're going to get from?
Yeah.
Whereas with Tottenham, it's just like you said. We all smile because we're all slightly baffled by the whole thing with Tottenham. And I think the interesting thing with Spurs, obviously, they perform well in the Champions League format, and I think that's aided by the fact that obviously
they're the Europa League champions. They've literally gone through a European knockout phase.
And that's, but I think it's interesting as well when you compare their form in the league to the Champions League. Obviously, in the league, when you play against certain teams will be thinking, I just don't want to get whacked. So they may not be turning up to get a victory. They may just be aiming not to lose. Whereas in the Champions League, everyone wants to win. And that may be benefiting Spurs and the type of football they play and the players they have at their disposal, where there is a little bit more room. There is, teams are playing a high line, and Spurs, because of their just this vivacious need to be different and odd and peculiar, it's kind of suited them a little bit throughout this little run. I think if you're Atletico Madrid here, you want, again, they're at home at the first leg, aren't they? So get your business done early. And I think you would take the wind out of Tottenham's sails because they confidence is at an all-time low. And I think if you were to go and really put a performance on, going back to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium now, the fans wouldn't take a lot of joy out of welcoming Atletico Madrid with, say, a 2-goal lead. I think that's your key thing here. If you're Atletico, you want to look at this. If you could get your 2-goal lead, because what it means is you go 1-0 up at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and you just kill hearts and minds.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to be conscious of that. Tottenham, that there was elements of some supporters having a bit of a go against Crystal Palace. There was also elements of some supporters literally just walking out.
Yeah.
It doesn't to me feel as though, I think there's moments in seasons where things can feel like respite. I feel as though that's gone a bit too far for Tottenham. Atletico just got to keep them honest.
Yeah, I think so. I think the reason I worry for Tottenham in the Premier League is because when you look at them compared to West Ham and to Nottingham Forest, I think the players in that West Ham team and that Nottingham Forest team are ready to roll their sleeves up and get stuck in, and they're not sort of scared to get drawn into a dogfight a little bit, whereas I think Spurs are. You know, I think some of those Spurs players, I mean, Mickey van der Ven is probably the main example. Obviously gets sent off against Palace. I think he's thinking, I don't want to get involved in a relegation scrap. Like, I'm too good to be in a relegation scrap. And he probably is in some ways, but that's the situation that Spurs find themselves in. Whereas I think the Champions League as well, it's, you know, that they haven't got that. It's a chance for these players, the likes of Xavi Simons and sort of their better players, to have a platform to really impress. Whereas I think in the Premier League, I just think that grittiness and that mental resilience just isn't there. But I think, whereas, like you say, I think Liverpool can view the Champions League as a little bit of a respite from a tough season. I think there is a limit to how tough a season can be and how much respite then you can actually get from a decent performance in the Champions League. And I think Spurs have probably passed that limit. And like you say, I think, you know, if Atletico take the lead in the tie and then take a positive result back to Tottenham, I mean, you just fear for how completely... I don't know what's worse, whether it becomes a toxic atmosphere or just a completely apathetic one, because I think it'd be sad. Yeah.
I think well, the people who stayed the other day, you know, probably the couple of hundred of them who weren't on the tube by the 50th minute. I mean, people weren't even angry.
Yeah,
they get to that point where they're not shouting abuse.
Yeah.
They're just kind of just there, like, really? Is this?
Yeah.
And I think, as you say, that's probably worse, isn't it?
Yeah, and I always think back to 2019, obviously, when Liverpool won it, and it was, you know, such a great few days in the build up to that. But I remember the day of the final being sat with, you know, a lot of Spurs fans, and the majority of them were just absolutely fantastic and just so just delighted to be able to get to the Champions League final, and, you know, magnanimous in defeat as well afterwards. And I think for them, you know, to be looking at where they were a few years ago to now, you know, it is sad, isn't it? It is sort of hard to sort of make sense of where it's all gone wrong. So yeah, I think if I was Atletico, you'd just be thinking nothing stupid, and you're probably home and hosed.
Do you think, I mean, Neil and I were talking before we came on air then, where is this an opportunity for maybe one or two Spurs players to put a performance in for people to stand up and notice in terms of
to put themselves in the shop window? Yeah.
Is it an opportunity for a World Cup place? Because, I mean, there's a number of internationals at Spurs there who, due to their league performance and maybe some individual performance, may not be that comfortable looking into a World Cup summer and also a transfer window. We don't know if Spurs are going to get relegated. We all have our own opinions on that, but I think some of those players may want to take a bit of personal pride in these next two games to go, actually, yeah, we can do this.
Yeah, well, I think John tweeted, didn't he, after the Palace game, has Van der Ven been sort of, has he got too much Spurs about him now to go near him? And obviously it's, you know, tongue in cheek, and I think he is a good player, but I do think, you know, there's probably people earlier in the season who you'd gone, oh, Mickey van der Ven, yeah, he'd be a great option this summer. And I think now you're looking at it and you're thinking, would he? So I think for players like that, it's a chance maybe to redeem themselves a little bit. But I mean, if they get relegated, I'm not quite sure a decent performance in the last 16 of the Champions League is going to save them.
Keifer, Newcastle, Barcelona, I think that this couldn't have broken nicer for Barcelona. Someone had to do Newcastle away in the last 16, because the way they finish, you're going to do Newcastle away, that's going to be the first game. Barcelona have done it. They got them early in the group stage, where it was about as vociferous as it's going to get. In a way, they're almost inoculated from it, Barcelona. They went there and they impressed as well. They won 2-1, but it could have been
Was that
more.
Newcastle's first home game
of this season? This format. So it was a full-on, big night at St James's Park. Well, Barcelona have lived one. Now, they've got a couple of injury issues at the minute, Barcelona, and that could weaken them for this. But I almost don't think there's a side who would go into this feeling better equipped to go and do Newcastle away than Barcelona.
So, is that Newcastle this week, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Newcastle's a weird one, because obviously not to the same extent as Tottenham, maybe more similarly to Liverpool. Like, they're obviously massively underperforming this year in the league in terms of where they should be. And, you know, I think people thought it'd be another year where they'd build on, and they just haven't done that. You know, they have been unlucky in some of the kind of the cups and stuff, obviously been knocked out to Manchester City both times. But I think there's a feeling amongst the supporters that they aren't kind of delivering on the potential. Kind of maybe it's a situation of one step forward, two step backs kind of thing. Since they first got into the Champions League, they haven't really been able to kick on again. And obviously that's really hard for a number of reasons. But, you know, does the Champions League offer them that? I think for Barcelona it'll be interesting, because Newcastle, we know, even when Liverpool have been there, and Liverpool played them twice this season, so they would be far more well equipped. But, like, St James's Park is horrible, and Newcastle are so physical, and they can just make it. Even if the quality isn't there, they can put you into an absolute dogfight. And I know obviously Barcelona have already experienced kind of come through St James's Park, and they can take confidence from that. But I just think it's maybe like when the chips are down kind of thing, and Newcastle is it's building into something.
I think that the building thing is, if you're Barcelona, this is one where it demands the classic European away performance of quieten the crowd, make them feel like it's all a bit hopeless, it's all a bit beyond them, score when you're on top, make sure not, it genuinely is the hit, because it's not too dissimilar, I think, to Liverpool's Galatasaray thing of what you don't want is you don't want this to get away from you. I don't think any of us sitting here think, for instance, and listen, I suspect we would all quite like to be proven wrong, but I don't think any of us sitting here think there's a way Leverkusen whip up into a 3-0. Or anything like that. But you can imagine how, there's a penalty that's a bit contentious, you're 1-0 down, then suddenly the crowd's up, it goes 2. And you can see how that could happen at Newcastle, you can see how that could happen at Galatasaray, and I think that's Barcelona's job is, we just don't let that happen.
No, and you don't want the game for Barcelona to start in the 40th minute, because Newcastle, like Keifer said there, will make it a dogfight, and it's much harder to come back from 1 or 2-0 down or gain the referee back on your side, because Barca will want all the big hits for European away. And I think that's the interesting thing where Newcastle, I listened to you the other day talking to one of their guys,
Alex, yeah.
It's become a little stale. And actually, if you're Newcastle, this is the perfect opportunity where go and give them something to shout about. Go and really put your stamp on it, because actually, if you are home first leg, and it goes back to the Leverkusen sort of idea here, where if you're at home first leg, give yourself something to go there with. Give yourself something to back up over there as well, because there'd be nothing more impressive for them to go there and make it a dogfight over there and really sort of stick in. So if you're Barcelona, I think you are going there with the idea of your game plan's been set out as soon as this draw was probably made.
Newcastle got a bit of form in the end this season. For instance, they get the draw against Paris Saint-Germain. I think in a really weird way, I think if Newcastle do have something to go over there, I'd have more belief in them than almost any of the other sides, because they've shown they can do in the league. What they've shown they're good at is being decent front runners. What they've not shown they're good at going away from home is making the running, especially against a weaker side. Well, Barcelona won't be a weaker side. I think if last season they go to what they do in the League Cup, speaks to this, Beth. If Newcastle can get the noses in front, I think this is, in a way, it's almost the biggest first leg of all of them this week. I think, obviously Real Man City will always be big, full stop, but where there is a clear disparity between the two sides, for me, this is the biggest first leg.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And again, they have players who, they're not afraid to roll the sleeves up and get stuck in, are they, Newcastle? And, I think whenever Liverpool play Newcastle, I don't particularly look forward to it, because I always think it's going to be a tough game, and I don't think this will be any exception. I think obviously it will be, the task is for them as much as for Barcelona, it's to not do anything silly. For Newcastle, it's the same thing. If they're 1-0 down inside 10 minutes, then all of a sudden that doubt starts to creep in and stuff. So I think, they just need to keep it, to make the conditions sort of perfect for them to be able to drag Barcelona into a fight, make it scrappy. And if Will Osula can pull off the kind of finish that he did against Manchester United, then they might have a chance.
But I think that's really interesting as well, is if you're going in with your plan, if you're Newcastle, if the plan doesn't come off in the first 20 minutes, don't be disheartened by it, because the game can very easily get away with you with the world-class quality across Barcelona's squad, where if you do go 1-0 down, or you haven't had your goal in the first 20 minutes, either stick to the plan or be well aware of the backup plan that Eddie Howe, I imagine, will have in place, because that game could very easily get away from Newcastle very quickly.
I mean, they've been building for this, haven't they, for 2 campaigns now? It's largely been the same squads in the first Champions League campaign and now this one. I think the first campaign they had PSG, Milan, Dortmund. Obviously they've had Barcelona. They've had some tough games. They've got to the last 16. I think also the manager's quietly under pressure as well.
I think he is, yeah.
So I think first 10-15 minutes. The first goal is massive in attack, because if it's a Newcastle goal, St James's Park will be rocking. And if you're a Barcelona player, I mean, I always think of when City came to Anfield in 17-18 and Liverpool just blew them away in that kind of maybe an 8-minute period kind of thing. And you could see something similar happen at Newcastle if Barcelona's kind of head was in the washing machine. But if it goes the other way and people are 50-50 with the manager, maybe glass half full, they've gone 1-0 down after 10 minutes, it's like, this is done, this is a season done. It could quite quickly turn toxic.
Yeah, no, because the season done element is, for me, now the biggest Newcastle concern. Ironically, I think they'd have found this game harder if they'd have gone through, if they'd have gone through against Manchester City. There's additional pressure. Atalanta versus Bayern Munich, Beth. We've got experience of Atalanta from a Liverpool point of view last couple of seasons. Again, they're another team that has European pedigree. They're not the biggest name in Italy, far from it. Napoli haven't made it this far. Inter Milan haven't made it this far, but Atalanta have. And being able to box clever around two legs is something that they've been good at in the past. And if you're Bayern Munich, you sort of, you're probably wishing, I wish we could have got Leverkusen. We know them inside out.
Yeah, I think Atalanta are quite hard to predict. I actually felt quite smug because we got asked at work to, I think maybe like toward the end of the league phase to pick our team that we thought were most likely to. Oh no, sorry, it must have been after because did they have Dortmund in the
playoff?
In the playoff, that we had to pick the team we thought were most likely to overcome the deficit, and we're Atalanta 2-0 down.
Yeah.
And I picked Atalanta because I thought going away from home against them, you don't really quite know how it's gonna turn out. So yeah, I think Bayern Munich, probably.
They're a far better side than Dortmund. There's a league table that tells you that.
They are a far better side, and they're sort of scoring goals for fun. Harry Kane's having a tremendous season. Luis Diaz is having a tremendous season. So I don't see a world where Bayern Munich don't win the tie. But again, I think as with everyone at this stage of the competition, Atalanta are there on merit. They deserve to be there. They're not to be taken lightly. Bayern Munich, as brilliant as they've been domestically, they go to what did they lose?
3-1.
Arsenal 3-1.
Well, I think the interesting thing is, Beth, normally you'd say who the side with the European pedigree, Bayern Munich or someone like Atalanta. Normally it would just be Bayern Munich, but they actually have not done that well in this competition because this is the only European competition they will play in. But they haven't actually done that well in this competition for a few years, whereas, as I say, Atalanta can look at, we've gone all the way in Europe. We've done pretty well at times in the Champions League. They're the side who, ironically, sort of has that capability within them, and I think that's what makes this one quite compelling.
It does, and I think I'm sure in the back of the Bayern players' minds they'll be thinking, listen, if we don't do well here, then Bayern Space will be on Twitter slagging us off no end. So I'm sure that'll be galvanising them as well. But yeah, no, I think it'll be certainly the away leg will pose a few problems for Bayern.
Want to move forward and do Real Madrid, Man City. It is just always going to be fascinating. It's a classic. Can they both lose? But they can't, Ali. Unfortunately, one of them does have to go through. You've just got to sort of wonder if you're moving into the Real Madrid space of the season here. That's always what would worry me. There's been weaknesses with this Real side. You've seen them in Europe over the course of the season. We saw some of them at Anfield. They've shifted the manager. But you sort of, if anything, maybe buy into the mythology that this is almost when they're at the most dangerous, all this bollocks, and that all of a sudden Man City could find it go against them. I feel as though City might just have a bit too much in transition for Real Madrid.
Yeah, it's interesting. Real Madrid have sort of a similar time of the year, sort of around March, that City do in the league, where they both just decide to come alive. Now, I've watched a bit of Real Madrid this season, and it's been at times a bit clunky and a little bit, it hasn't been as seamless as it has been in previous seasons. Obviously, a manager change does that to a club, and especially a club like Real Madrid, where as you said, the Madrid Run newspaper has a lot to say about it. I think, with City, I think they will just have too much in transition. I think City now, they're a little peculiar because I really thought they were going to kick on and make sort of on all fronts, make an absolute sort of charge for everything. And they have to a certain extent, but they haven't been as seamless as they have been in previous seasons. But I look at sort of what they did at the start of the season against Real Madrid, and I look at sort of what City have done dispatching Newcastle last night. And I just think City will, Guardiola knows the game and he knows how to play these fixtures. And I think City will just hang their hats on. We will do what we normally do. I don't think there's going to be any surprises from Guardiola like he has done in previous seasons. I don't think there's going to be a head loss. I think it'll be go in, business as usual, get in there, ruffle feathers. And again, if you're at the Bernabeu, don't get them rolled up.
Ruffle feathers, though, I think is the key thing. That is different with the City side. It isn't that sort of seamless control. Maybe that's why there's a couple more risks. Keifer, it's why the Nottingham Forest thing can happen. Is to me, they look at their best when they decide we're having 15, 20 minutes here of doing everyone's head in, and we're going to be dead direct through the middle of the pitch, and we're going to be really quick with it. You can make a bit of an argument that if you want to go down all of these sides in terms of what I've seen, City to me look the most capable of putting together 45 really intense minutes. at both ends of the pitch. Arsenal at one end of the pitch definitely, but at both ends of the pitch, City to me look as though they've got that in them, and I mean that is a little bit of a risk. It could leave them a little bit more open against Real Madrid than they might like, but I think that's what I don't think Madrid like, this incarnation of Madrid either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the game in December, you think of where City were at as well. They're having a bit of a lull, and to think now, a couple of months later, they've added Semenyo, and you talk about being intense and being direct. I mean, he is kind of the epitome of that. He's been brilliant, hasn't he, since he signed for them? I think he's, there's a lot of talk, certainly in the first half of the season at City, were maybe too reliant on Haaland and maybe where the goals come from, and Semenyo's kind of stepped up. But I think aside from the goals and aside from maybe what you see on a piece of paper, the stats and stuff on the eye test, I mean, he is brilliant, and even if he's not scoring, he's not assisting, he's an absolute nuisance. And if he plays on the left or the right, if he's going to be up against, he'd probably play on the right, but if he's going to be up against someone like Trent, just there'll be space, you'd imagine, maybe in behind. But Madrid have got a few injuries at the moment. There's Mbappe, I don't think people are really sure if he's going to play. Obviously, Rodrigo's out for the season. I think there's a few others in there as well. So it's not the Madrid of old. It's certainly not. I don't think they've got that same kind of aura about them as they maybe did in 2022 when they just kind of went on that unbelievable run, beat PSG, Chelsea, City, and then us. But I think with the thing that will play into City's hand is that they've played Madrid so many times. I think it's 5 seasons in a row now, isn't it? And I think if there's a team or a manager who've kind of experienced getting the full Madrid experience, I think it's Manchester City. I mean, that 21-22 game, I remember coming back from Villarreal, I was in the airport and we landed and it was like 77th minute, Mahrez 1-0. I was like, well, that's that then. By the time we got to the passport, it was like extra time. It was just like completely just unbelievable. So I think City have clearly learned from that. They've built on that. They've obviously got to more semi-finals, but they've also done a hell of a lot of trips to the Bernabeu. So I think it's at that stage where like the quality shines through. And I think if you were to put their teams on paper at this moment in time with recent form, I think City just probably nick it.
Paris Saint-Germain Chelsea is... It's weirdly the one thing I need to remember, almost culturally need to remember it is obviously an echo of the Club World Cup final.
Of course, yeah.
Which you'd forgotten.
I had completely forgotten.
Which is fine because so had I. Until I sort of began to really engage with this the other day. There's that. I don't think that matters particularly, but it's more the weirdness of Chelsea, where Chelsea actually are in this overall. If you want to do a couple of sentences about Liverpool, the side that's won it the third most. Anfield's always really, really dangerous this season, in and out, but unbelievable quality on the day. You want to do a sentence about Bayern Munich. You just did it before. Kane, Diaz, what they feel as though they can do attacking. We've all got a real sense of Arsenal. If I'm Paris Saint-Germain, there is just a bit of a sense of, I think they're not quite the force they were around this time last season, but they haven't got the slightest idea what they're getting from Chelsea, I don't think.
No, I mean, that Chelsea result the other night, I just did not predict that at all. I think Villa are a really weird side in the sense that, I think they were maybe fortunate at some points earlier in the season in terms of how often they were able to convert chances with really low XG, and there's that whole sort of ongoing beef with them and that Twitter XG philosophy Twitter account, and but yeah, I mean, it's to go away to Villa Park and pull off that kind of performance is really, really impressive from Chelsea. And I've had spells where I've watched them under Maresca and under Rossini where I've thought, oh, they look really, really good. I think I watched the start of the game against Leeds when they went 2-0 up, and you just think, they're so in control, and they go on and they end up drawing that game. So it's so hard, I think, to predict, which Chelsea are going to turn up. I think PSG, they're not the force that they were this time last season. And I know, obviously, last season they really grew into the campaign and they are the European champions. So you can't underestimate them at all. But even in are they top of League One at the minute?
Only just 3 points.
Yeah. They lost to Monaco, I think.
The other night.
Yeah. And so I think the Chelsea should be looking at them certainly as well, with that added thing of they beat them in a major tournament. But I think they will probably be looking at that thinking, well, we can get at these. But I think, like you say, for PSG, you're looking at it. Probably depends what Cole Palmer turns up, doesn't it? Because I think he's obviously had a in and out season.
For me, Keifer, Chelsea. The essence of Chelsea this season, the one thing I think you could possibly say with certainty across the home and away games here is Chelsea will be the better side in one of the four halves. And for me, I almost think that could be the defining thing of the tie, which is how much how much for instance, does João Pedro play as he played at Villa Park in that half? Is João Pedro that footballer, or is he the one that remains slightly enigmatic?
That's the thing with a young team, isn't it? It's a flip of a coin.
And you've got the same thing with Palmer, the same thing with Garnacho, the same thing with Estevao, even to an extent the same thing with Enzo and with Caicedo, where they could just have 45 minutes where all of them are absolutely on song, and at which point it could be very hard for Paris Saint-Germain. And I think that there will be one half in these four will go that way, and for me it's about what Chelsea get out of that period, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose you could almost argue that even if, you know, Cole Palmer's in one half, he could probably win the game on his own, you know, such as his quality and stuff as he has done at times for Chelsea. But I think I actually think Chelsea will beat PSG over two legs. I think they're a much better side set up for kind of cup competitions. I think they are a really talented side, but they're also a really young side, very inexperienced. I think that the mentality and the maturity isn't there to kind of do a full 38-game campaign and maybe, you know, win the Premier League or even put a challenge together. I mean, I know it's a different manager, but I always think of last year, October 24, they obviously Liverpool played them, beat them, gave them a really hard game at Anfield, and then even at Christmas time they were still in kind of the hunt for the Premier League, and they almost just talked themselves out of the title race. Had like a massive slump over Christmas, and that was kind of their season done. It was like, oh, we're a young team. It was almost like no one took that accountability to kind of like grab it and be like, there's an opportunity to come here. No one's taking on the league. You know, Liverpool were in a transition year, and no one really stepped up. And I've always thought that's the thing with this Chelsea team and what happens when you buy so many young players. But I think also in terms of PSG, you know, you think of where they were last year. They had, you know, a 10, 15 point gap at the top of Ligue 1, and they don't have that anymore. They've obviously made a bit of a mess of the league, but also in the playoff round, they made hard work on Monaco. I also think there's elements of the old PSG kind of resurfacing. So you think of when they had like Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe, it was kind of like ego central. It was like, and I think that started to creep in a bit. There's you talk of Dembele and Doué maybe not getting on, and there's drama starting to unfold around PSG, and that wasn't there last year. And it was, you know, they were able to win football matches and show their quality because they were kind of as good as a collective. But I think there's a bit of disharmony brewing there.
The other thing that wasn't there last year, Ali, was the video. For me, I don't want to talk down their achievement last year and what they go on and do to Inter Milan in the final. I mean, it did feel like it was always one game too far for that Inter Milan side in every single sense. But what they are excellent second 45 against Man City. It's the second to last group game. They then come through the last group game, but they've not got enough to qualify. Then they've got a couple of games. Maybe it was Lille or it might have been Brest. I think it was Brest that they had in the playoff. And then suddenly they've got Liverpool. And everyone knew these are dangerous. This could well be. They did what they did to City. But what there wasn't was the idea of tons of data to be analysed, loads of video to watch. And I think one of the things that's shifted for Paris Saint-Germain now, just a little bit, is everyone goes, all right, well, that's how that midfield operates. All right, this is what this front three, this is where they want the ball, this is where they don't want the ball. This is how Hakimi wants to go and add to that attack. And I think all of that has just made it a teeny little bit tougher for PSG. That's not to say they can't still go on and win this competition, but I think everyone's got more of a sense of what it is they're trying to do now.
Yeah, and that was always going to be the case. You win a European Cup, everyone's going to have a plan for you, or an idea of a plan. And
everyone's going to watch it and analyse it because they want to break down, where did you come from, how's it this good, how do we replicate it?
Exactly, and that's where I think PSG are in quite an odd sort of space in that aspect, where they're not as seamless as they were last season. They're struggling a little more in games where you think, well, this is sort of boxed off, and you know that I think we all kind of thought the Monaco game was going to be a bit of a simple tick box exercise. See you later, done, and it hasn't been. And I think there is something there that I understand obviously what you guys have said about Chelsea, and I find it interesting. But I think if you are PSG, you've got to maybe have an air of arrogance about you. To go, hang on, we're European champions here. We won this competition last year, and if you're looking at that Chelsea team, they won a Club World Cup, but they haven't won anything as that squad together in a competitive league season. So I think if you are PSG, you've got to maybe go back to basics a little bit and go, what got us there? And you know what, they can have all the video and the data that they want, but on an individual basis, we are far better than them.
Yeah.
Chelsea have very, very, very good players, but if you look at that midfield of PSG compared to the midfield of Chelsea's, I think the midfield of Chelsea's is incredibly good, but PSG's is better. And they've also got the experience of, well, we've got to this point last season and we knew how to turn it on. And I think that's always something where you're never quite sure what's going to happen with Chelsea because we've got no data to back it up. We've kind of done, it's the other side where we don't have the video on Chelsea for this point of the season. because they haven't been at this point of the season, especially under this new manager, but this group of players. Whereas PSG, I think you're looking at that going, well, this was our way home last season. Now we've got to adapt and we've got to change, and Chelsea are pose their own threats. But I think if you're PSG, you've got to make this purely business and purely about the tie in front of you, and almost take a step back from, don't worry too much about what they're going to pose in that sense. Have a look at what we've got and have full respect on what Chelsea can actually do, because I do think Chelsea may be one step too far under this iteration of this team, because we realise that this manager hasn't been in the job particularly long.
All right, we end with the Reds, who will get the winners of Paris Saint-Germain versus Chelsea. 2 legs against Chelsea in April, I'll tell you what, that takes me back. That takes me back. There is, Beth, first and foremost, the manager's got good selection headaches. I'm not having that. Selection headaches are a bad thing. I think from Liverpool's point of view, he's got I think a choice between 3 different approaches in terms of overall sort of shape. One is Wirtz in behind 3. One is no Wirtz at all, and 4-3-3 as per last season because of Wirtz's fitness. And the other one is possibly using either Wirtz off the left or playing that sort of 4-2-4-0 that we've seen, where no one plays centre forward, 2 wide players, and maybe that lets you rest someone. So that's the first thing the Liverpool manager's got, is he's got a decision to make around shape and approach, and it may well be a lot of it's guided by how fit they actually think Florian Wirtz is.
Yeah, I think so, and I think, obviously it was a much changed team on Friday night, but it was just nice to have to look at a bench and see a little bit of quality, because I think that has really hurt Liverpool this season, and the last couple of months in particular. I think not having those options, the manager hasn't had a choice, has he really? He's, beyond sort of 1 or 2 changes, he's had very few players to pick from, and it's almost like the team has picked itself really. And I think now, like you say, he's able to maybe be a little bit more flexible in terms of his approach and adapt, in terms of which formation he wants to go for. I'd be surprised if Wirtz starts. How long did he get on Friday? About
25.
20? Yeah. I mean, I suppose you've always got the option of starting him, and then you maybe take him off at 60 and see if he's ready to do that. But if not, he's a great option to have coming off the bench. I think that the positive thing is, on Friday, Mo Salah gets a goal for the 2nd game in a row, which, I think his performances weren't particularly great against Wolves, but, it's 2 goals in 2. It's no bad place to be in going into a knockout tie. Curtis Jones as well obviously gets his goal, great finish as well. And I think the nice thing as well for Liverpool is, but the big concern for me that the last few weeks has been Hugo Ekitike just not having any option really to rest him. He is sort of carrying the workload for them, and I think now if they get through this round, they get to the quarterfinals, there's a will where Alexander Isak is available to be able to come on for 20 minutes at the end of a tie, and I think that could be hugely important for Liverpool and in terms of keeping Ekitike fit. But yeah, I think just having more options.
So what do you think he'll do with the shape? Do you think he goes, because I wonder if he gets to sort of look at, it's an away game, you can use Wirtz off the bench. Let's go with the robust midfield that we've had in the past, and let's sort of treat it as a European away game and be able to say to Wirtz and to his teammates for that matter, you're here, but if we need you, you're here because we expect to be strong last 60, from 60 onwards. What do you think he'll do?
I think he'll do that. I think Wirtz will probably start against Tottenham and, possibly the 2nd leg at home. I think having that midfield, I wouldn't even be surprised if he goes for Gomez at right back and then Szoboszlai, McAllister, Gravenberch in midfield, and just try and, it's probably not going to be quite as dynamic, but I think, you just want to make sure that, again, nothing silly happens, because then you take them back to Anfield with a 0-0 or 1-0 or whatever, and you feel like you can probably get the job done there. I just don't want to see Szoboszlai at right back. I think, you just miss his impetus so much in midfield, and I think Gomez obviously has got some minutes under his belt the past few weeks. I know they'll probably be wanting to manage him, but I think there's enough of a gap between Friday and Tuesday, so I think that's probably the way to go.
Agree, disagree?
It depends on McAllister, I suppose. I know he said he was all right after the game. but I suppose that has a big impact, really. He did Szoboszlai right back in the first game with Frimpong, didn't he, on the right side of the attack, which, again, that was at the very start of kind of Frimpong's Liverpool career. So you can kind of maybe understand why he did that. I think the thing here now is that Liverpool have already done the dance to Galatasaray. They've already been to the ground. You know, they've kind of experienced everything away from the pitch, if that makes sense. They've, the atmosphere, how hostile it's going to be. Obviously, that was very early on in the season. And I also think that result at the time, it was a bit like, oh, right, this is a team that should be challenging for the Premier League, and they've just lost at Galatasaray. But if you actually look at it in the wider context now, that came in a run of like 1 win in 7. So, like, I mean, even if Liverpool were to lose this 1-0 again, like I think you'd probably take that. You'd feel, not take it, but you'd feel comfortable enough to turn it around. But to go back to your question, I think it depends on McAllister. I think I would like to see Gomez. Just I think gives you a bit more solidity, and I'd be happy with a 0-0 to kind of come back and take the game to Anfield. I think Jones is in a good moment. I think he did well. I know he didn't play particularly well on Tuesday. Maybe was perhaps at fault for the second goal, but I think that goal on Friday night was kind of everything Curtis Jones is about. It was really neat. It was a burst away, a bit of energy, and a great finish as well. And I think in the first game back in September, I think Liverpool just didn't move the ball quick enough. They kind of dawdled too much, didn't create a great deal, almost like they were a bit shell-shocked after the goal. And I think, if you can, put Szoboszlai in midfield, he's someone who's going to drive you up the pitch and kind of, bring that energy. So I think if they've learned anything from September, it will be to do the 3 in midfield and kind of bring the game to Galatasaray.
Yeah, I'm intrigued because the Galatasaray game, from where we played them, obviously at the start of the season, to where they are now, they've adapted and changed as well. And their result against Juventus, they're posing a greater threat than they were in that first game. I would personally, even if McAllister was fit, I would play Jones and Szoboszlai and Gravenberch, because I think legs are going to be important. They can be quite expansive, Galatasaray, and in that first leg in particular, there was a lot of space. It's not a small pitch, and I think McAllister, I don't know if obviously if the knock has led to something, or I imagine we haven't really heard too much.
He was walking fine on Friday, so I don't think it will be a big
So
issue.
I think having the option of Alexis McAllister, if you're going to do, as we've mentioned today, the archetypal European performance where you do 60 of your solid 3 midfield and you bring Alexis McAllister on to then dictate tempo, and depending on the result, you gain an element of control for the final 30. But I agree with Joe Gomez at right back. I think that's the move that I would do. But I think I would bring Curtis Jones into midfield and just shore things up. Sounds a little bit sort of cup half empty about this, because I want us to go and impose and play very, very well. But I don't think we should forget the threat that Galatasaray will pose.
I think they have, Ali, that Juventus game's a great example of it. Juventus are 2-1 up at half-time. It's just worth remembering that Juventus were 2-1 up at half-time, because what I think they have is a mentality of, well, we've got to do it at home, because we're not going to do it away. Yeah. And I think that Liverpool, for me, whatever the manager does, and I mean this, genuinely as the thing that I most want to be borne in mind, is Liverpool have to have a 100-minute plan for this game, in a way that, firstly, you don't always have to have in league games anyway. Secondly, in a way I don't think we have had often enough in league games, full stop, over the course of the season. Yeah. But thirdly, because of any sort of decision you want to make about selection, well, let's just say it's the team that you've all described. Mm-hmm. I've got Frimpong off the bench. Yeah. I've got Wirtz off the bench, from what you've all said. I've got either McAllister or Jones off the bench. Yeah. In amongst this, I've got a left-back change, depending on what you're all going to do at left-back, and whether or not...
Ngamoa.
And then I've got Ngamoa. And my point here is that the manager, I think, whatever it is he's doing, I think the most important thing is to think it could be 2-1 to Liverpool on 83. Mm-hmm. And the Galatasaray mentality and the way they use their subs and their older players off the bench will still be, we need to find a way to score 3 goals here. Mm-hmm. There is no job done in this game for Liverpool. There could be one in the second leg, and we hope there is, but there is no job done moment, I think, for Liverpool in this. So whatever it is he does, whether he goes stacked with attacking options early and then decides to strengthen, or the other way around, whatever it is he does, I think he just has to have a 100-minute plan.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think what he also needs to... I wouldn't like a feat in both camps. For example, I wouldn't like a shored up midfield where you then start Jeremy Frimpong at right wing, like he did in the first game.
Yeah.
I think you need to have a plan in the sense
He's got to pick Salah right side.
He's got to pick Salah right side. So therefore, your plan is Jeremy Frimpong is probably your 55 onwards sub, depending on how the game's panning out, depending on are they now going for it. Galatasaray are going to take this how we've described a number of games. If you're playing at home first leg, you give everything for it, and you see what you can get out of it, because they will be under the impression coming to Anfield. I think they'd rather sit in if they could bring anything back to Anfield, but I believe they won't come there thinking, well, we'll pick up a result. So everything's got to be done for them in the first leg. I do think, like you said, it's got to be a 100-minute plan where I don't like the idea of pre-scripted substitutions as such. I don't like, unless there's an injury involved, I don't think that's necessary, because the game doesn't always unfold how I think the club will probably script it. So I think you are looking at a Jeremy Frimpong from 55. I think you are looking at ideas of Florian Wirtz off the bench, potentially from half-time, depending on how the game's going. If it's not sort of ending up how you think it is, I think you are looking at, I mean, you said you've got a left-back substitution. Again, if you've got a 100-minute plan, does your plan involve Andy Robinson from the start? I don't know. Andy Robinson played the whole game on Friday night, but away in Turkey, hostile environment, hostile ground. Do you go tried and trusted Joe Gomez on one side, Andy Robinson on the other, and then you go on with a Frimpong and then a Kirkes on your 60 or 70 minutes for pace and direction and power and just pose a different threat?
I think that this is the key part for me. Like, it could be 3-1 to Galatasaray on 80. And I'm firstly of the view Galatasaray thinking we need a fourth. So I'm secondly of the view Liverpool need to have a plan, firstly how they don't get a fourth, but also we can still make this 3-3. This is the cliched thing that managers say after a European first leg is it's only half-time. That's the cliche. Every manager says it. Whatever the scoreline is, well, we all know it's only half-time. But for me, this game, from Liverpool's point of view, is that is the essence. That will be Galatasaray's outlook. It is as though if Galatasaray are on top with 8 minutes to go at the end of the match, they'll have the attitude of, well, it's like we've got 8 minutes to go at the end of the half, and if we can get another one before the break, it pulls in our favour. Liverpool have got to have that, I think. I just don't want to see a Liverpool, which we've seen at times, trying to slip in and out of gears. I think they have to be in the gear that they need to be in at all times during this game.
Yeah, they do, and you know, obviously late goals have been such a problem this season. So I think 100% concentration until the final whistle is needed. And I think, but I do think that is where having those options will be really helpful, because I think again there's been too many games this season where Liverpool have just looked absolutely goosed by 70 minutes, and you've looked at the bench and you've thought, well, who are you going to bring on? But I think, you know, it is a really positive prospect to have Jeremy Frimpong coming on against tiring legs at 70 minutes. It is a really positive prospect. I know obviously there'll be a lot of people wanting Nguemo to start. I really don't think that he will start.
Nor do I.
I don't really think that he should. I think it's a really hostile environment. It's a huge game. I think, you know, whatever your opinions are on Cody Gakpo, he's got plenty of experience of playing in these kind of games. And plus, I think Nguemo is still, in terms of his explosivity, is probably better as a sub in terms of the way that he can impact things late on. So I think if you're able to know that you've got 3 or 4 players who can come on and really make an impact, then that can really help with ensuring that you're able to go to the final whistle.
Red's going to go through?
Yes.
Yes.
Full house. That's been Unwrapped. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Water Frames. Thank you very much indeed to Keifer, to Ali, and to Beth. Paddy behind the cameras as well, making it all happen. See you later on.